Get out of here, Dad. Far away. Julian's words echoed in my ears like a death sentence. He had just handed me a check for $15,000 after selling my $4 million ranch behind my back. My own son, the person I trusted most in this world, was kicking me out of my own home as if I were an intruder. But what he didn't know was that I had known about his plans for a week and had already taken steps that would leave him speechless. $15,000? I asked with a smile he mistook for resignation. Is that all I'm worth to you after 40 years of building this place? Julian shrugged with a coldness that pierced my heart. Dad, you're getting too old to manage a ranch this big. I sold the property for $4 million. I invested the money in a business that will double our profits, and this is your share so you can live comfortably somewhere else. He showed me some papers with a forged signature that was supposedly mine. What Julian didn't know was that Owen had come to see me the week before, crying and trembling with rage. Dad, I heard Julian on the phone with a lawyer. They're planning to forge your signature and sell the ranch. He said he already has a buyer and that you're too senile to notice. My younger son had risked his relationship with his brother to save me from this betrayal. And thanks to him, I had been able to prepare for this moment. For 40 years, I had built this ranch with my own two hands. I arrived here a young widower with two small children and $100 in my pocket. I worked 18-hour days. My hands became covered in calluses. My back bent under the weight of feed sacks. But I never gave up. Every tree I planted, every fence I built, every animal I raised carried my sweat and my blood. This land wasn't just property. It was my soul materialized into $4 million of honest work. Julian was always different from Owen. From a young age, he would ask how much money we made, what the ranch was worth, when it would be his. While I woke up at dawn to milk the cows, he slept in late. While I negotiated with international buyers, he was out partying with the money I gave him. I paid for his college, his car, his wedding, his failed business ventures, always believing that one day he would appreciate my sacrifice. But the only thing he saw was an old man standing between him and his inheritance. Dad, you're 67 years old, he told me as he put the forged documents back in his briefcase. It's time you stop being stubborn and accept that you can't keep living alone in such a big place. With $15,000, you can rent an apartment in the city and live peacefully for the rest of your life. His tone was condescending, as if he were talking to a spoiled child. Besides, the buyer has already paid, and I've already invested the money. There's no turning back. I rose from my chair slowly, feeling every fiber of my being fill with a strength I hadn't felt in years. Julian thought he had defeated me, that he had taken everything I had fought for. But what he didn't know was that during that week, while he was celebrating his brilliant plan, I had been very busy with my lawyer Claire, preparing the biggest surprise of his life. The same determination that had led me to build a $4 million empire would now serve to show him that no one, not even my own son, was going to humiliate me like that. All right, Julian, I said with a calm that reassured him. I accept your proposal, but before I go, I want us to have dinner together one last time, as a farewell. He smiled, believing he had finally broken my will. Of course, Dad. I'll book a table at the fanciest restaurant in the city. You deserve it. What Julian didn't know was that this dinner would be the stage where his world would completely fall apart. The photograph of the ranch rested on the table, showing 4 decades of honest work. Soon, my son would discover that stealing from a man who built an empire with his own hands was not as easy as he had thought. That night I couldn't sleep. Julian's words echoed in my head like a painful refrain. Get out of here, Dad. Far away. I got up several times to walk through the house, touching each piece of furniture, each photograph, each object I had bought with my own effort. The ranch wasn't just my home. It was the physical testament to everything I had achieved against all odds. And now my own son wanted to erase me from history as if I had never existed. At dawn, I called Claire, my trusted lawyer. Eric, I need you to come to my office immediately, she said with urgency in her voice. I have news about what you told me yesterday. I drove to the city with a racing heart, knowing my future depended on what Claire had discovered. During the drive, I remembered how I had met this extraordinary woman 3 years ago when Julian began pressuring me to put the ranch in his name. Claire was different from all the lawyers I had met. She didn't treat me like an ignorant old man, but like a successful businessman who deserved respect. When I told her my suspicion about Julian's intentions, she didn't downplay my concerns. Eric, cases of financial abuse against seniors are on the rise, and sadly, many involve close family members, she had told me with complete frankness. We need to protect your assets before it's too late. Sit down, Eric, Claire said when I arrived at her office. Her serious face confirmed the news wasn't good. I investigated the documents Julian showed you yesterday. The signature is a forgery, obviously, but he has already filed those papers with the county records office. Officially, according to the system, the ranch is no longer yours. I felt the world collapse beneath my feet, but Claire continued with a smile that restored my hope. What Julian doesn't know is that last week when you came in alarmed by Owen's information, we already took preventive measures. Claire opened a thick folder full of official documents. Remember when you signed those papers last Monday? You not only transferred the ranch to an irrevocable trust, but you also established very specific clauses. According to these documents, you are the sole lifetime beneficiary of the trust, and only you can make decisions about the property. Furthermore, any attempt at a fraudulent sale is automatically void. Tears of relief streamed down my cheeks as Claire continued explaining. There's more, Claire said with satisfaction. We also installed hidden security cameras in your house last week and recorded the entire conversation yesterday when Julian gave you the check. We have complete evidence of his criminal intentions. She showed me the recordings on her computer. Seeing my own son speak so coldly about robbing me broke my heart, but it also filled me with a steely determination. And what about the money Julian claims to have invested? I asked with concern. Claire smiled in a way I hadn't seen before. That's Julian's problem, not yours. He sold something that didn't belong to him to a buyer who will soon discover he can't take possession of the property. When the buyer demands his $4 million back, Julian will have to explain where that money is. The poetic justice of the situation made me smile for the first time in days. I returned to the ranch feeling like a warrior prepared for battle. That afternoon, Julian called to confirm the farewell dinner. Dad, I've booked a table at the Summit Grill for tomorrow at 8. It will be a very special dinner, he said with that false sweetness that now nauseated me. Perfect, son. I have a surprise for you too, I replied with a smile he couldn't see over the phone. That night, I called Owen to tell him everything. Dad, I can't believe what Julian is doing, he said, his voice breaking. I knew he coveted the ranch, but I never thought he'd go this far. I explained the entire plan Claire and I had prepared. I want you to come to the restaurant tomorrow, but don't say anything to Julian. I need you to be a witness to everything that's about to happen. Owen agreed immediately, a mix of nervousness and admiration in his voice. The morning of the dinner, I woke up early to get ready. I chose my most elegant black suit, the one I had bought when I turned 60, to celebrate 4 decades of successful work. I polished my shoes with special care, shaved clean, and adjusted the silver cufflinks my late wife Emily had given me on our 20th anniversary. If Julian wanted a farewell dinner, I would give him one he would never forget. As I dressed, I remembered all the times Julian had tried to convince me to sell the ranch. Dad, you're not young enough for all this work anymore, he would constantly say. You could live comfortably in the city with the money from the sale. What he never understood was that the ranch wasn't work for me. It was my identity, my purpose, my connection to life. Every dawn among my trees, every afternoon feeding my animals, every night listening to the sounds of the countryside reminded me that I had built something beautiful and lasting. At 6 in the evening, Claire arrived at my house with a briefcase full of documents. Are you ready for this, Eric? She asked as we reviewed the plan one last time. More than ready, I replied, with a confidence I hadn't felt in weeks. Julian thinks he's giving me a farewell dinner, but in reality, it's going to be his wake-up call. Claire laughed heartily. I love working with you, Eric. Not many men your age would have the courage to confront their own son this way. When I arrived at the Summit Grill, Julian was already waiting for me at an elegant table by the window. He was dressed in his best suit, as if celebrating a victory. Dad, you look sharp, he said as he helped me sit down. I wanted this dinner to be special because I know it's going to be hard for you to adjust to your new life. The hypocrisy in his voice turned my stomach, but I maintained a serene smile. Thank you for being so considerate, Julian, I said as I unfolded the napkin on my lap. I also have something very special prepared for tonight. He smiled, believing I had finally accepted my defeat. What he didn't know was that in the next few minutes, his world would crumble like a house of cards, and the man he had underestimated for so many years was about to show him what he was really made of. Julian ordered the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu, as if celebrating the greatest victory of his life. Dad, I want to toast to your new chapter, he said, as the waiter poured the golden liquid into our glasses. I know it will be hard to adjust at first, but you'll see that living in the city will be much better for you." His smile was so fake it made me want to fling the truth across the table. But I held back. The show was just beginning. "Of course, son," I replied, raising my glass with a serenity that calmed him. "To new beginnings." We clinked. He drank deep. I took a measured sip and watched him over the rim, studying the face of the boy I had raised, trying to locate the moment he had learned to lie without blinking. "Dad, there's something else I need to tell you," Julian said after several sips, his tone turning more businesslike. "The buyer of the ranch wants to take possession next week. I need you to pack your personal things and be out by Friday." The coldness with which he said it confirmed that, to him, I was no longer his father, just an obstacle to be removed. "So soon?" I asked, feigning surprise. "I thought I'd have more time to say goodbye." Julian sighed, impatient. "Dad, don't make this harder than it already is. I've already found a perfect apartment for you downtown. It's furnished, has 24-hour security, and is close to the hospital in case you need medical attention." I forced myself not to laugh at the audacity. While he described my supposed future as if I were an invalid, I caught a familiar figure slipping in through the entrance. Owen took a table at the back exactly as we had planned. His eyes met mine briefly, steady, resolute, and I felt a steadiness gather in my chest. "Julian, there's something I don't understand," I said when he finished. "If the ranch was worth $4 million and you sold it for that price, where is the rest of the money? You only gave me $15,000. Julian took another sip, as if drawing courage from the glass. "Dad, I invested that money in a business that will give us much greater returns," he said with the forced patience one uses on a child. "I bought shares in a tech company that's about to revolutionize the market. In 5 years, that $4 million will turn into 20. His enthusiasm was genuine, which somehow made it more pathetic. "And what if that business doesn't work out?" I asked mildly. "What happens to the money from the ranch then?" Julian laughed condescendingly. "Dad, you don't understand investments. I studied business. I have connections. I know what I'm doing. Trust me." The irony of him asking for my trust after stealing everything I had was so immense I nearly choked on it. The waiter set down our mains, fragrant and carefully plated. I could barely taste a bite. Across from me, Julian ate with the appetite of a victor. "Dad, think of what you're gaining," he said between cuts of steak. "You won't have to wake up at dawn to milk cows. No more worrying about harvests or employees. You can finally rest." "What if I don't want to rest?" I asked softly. "What if I want to work my land until the last day of my life?" Julian set his knife down, frustration clouding his features. "Dad, you're 67. You're not at an age for that kind of labor. You could get hurt, get sick, even die alone out there. Besides, the deal is done. The papers are signed, the money is invested, there's no going back." "The papers are signed," I repeated. "What papers exactly?" He reached into his briefcase and produced the same documents he'd flashed the day before. "These papers. Here is your signature authorizing the sale." He tapped the page where a shaky imitation of my name sprawled in black ink. "When did I sign this?" I asked, my voice steady with effort. "You signed it a month ago when you came to visit me," he replied without flinching. "Don't you remember?" For a heartbeat, the room tilted. He was accusing me of senility to justify a theft. I let the moment hang, then placed my napkin calmly beside my plate. "I never signed those papers," I said. "And I never told you I wanted to sell the ranch. That is not my signature." Julian's face hardened. "Dad, this is exactly what I was afraid of. You're starting to have memory problems. That's why you need to move to the city where you can get the care you need." The manipulation was so brutal I felt heat rise in my neck. Before I could speak, a gentle hand touched my shoulder. "Good evening, Eric," Claire said with a warm smile. "I hope you don't mind me joining you." Julian's head snapped up. "Who is this, Dad?" "Julian," I said, and for the first time that night my smile was genuine. "Meet Claire. She's my lawyer. She has something interesting to tell you about those papers." Claire took the empty chair beside me with unhurried grace, then set a slim digital recorder on the table. "Just so we're all clear," she said pleasantly, "this conversation is being recorded." Julian's fork clinked against his plate. "Why would you record a family dinner?" "Because," Claire said, opening a thick folder, "you've represented this as a family matter, when in fact it appears to involve document fraud, forgery, and financial abuse of a senior." Color drained from Julian's face. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Claire slid a page across to him. "We compared the signature on your so-called sale authorization to 40 years of Eric's authenticated signatures. The mismatch is decisive. Also, she produced another glossy print. This is a still frame from a camera in your office building lobby. It shows you carrying these exact documents into a notary suite on a day Eric was confirmed to be 200 miles away. Where did you get that? Julian whispered. Public-facing cameras lawfully obtained, Claire said. And we have more. Recorded calls in which you discuss forging consent and creating a buyer named Javier Montenegro to mask the flow of funds. I blinked. That was new to me. A buyer who doesn't exist? Claire added for my benefit. And whose deposit landed in an account controlled by your son. Julian gripped the stem of his glass as if it might anchor him. Javier is legitimate. He wants the ranch for a tourist project. Javier Montenegro is a synthetic identity, Claire replied, her tone still courteous. The bank account is yours. The transfers are traceable. We've already initiated notices to freeze what remains. Julian looked to me, panic seeping through the cracks of his composure. Dad, you know me. I would never hurt you. This is a misunderstanding. Julian, I said, did you forge my signature to sell my ranch? He held my gaze for a long second. Then the mask slid back into place. Dad, maybe I took some liberties, but it was for your own good. You don't have the capacity. Stop, Claire said, her pleasantness crisping into steel. You have just admitted to document fraud on a live recording. Also, the ranch could never have been legally sold. Eric placed it in an irrevocable trust last week. He is the sole lifetime beneficiary. Any sale without the trustee's authorization is void ab initio. Julian's mouth fell open. What does that mean? It means, I said, you can't sell what you don't own. At that moment, Owen rose from the back and approached, standing at the edge of the table. Sorry to interrupt, he said, voice steady but tight. Julian, the bank has already frozen your accounts for suspicious activity. Julian stared at his brother, betrayed and bewildered. You're involved in this too? In protecting our father from your scheme, Owen said. Yes. The waiter hovered uneasily. I gave a small nod, and he retreated. The room seemed to shrink until only our table existed, with its halved steaks, cooling wine, and a stack of documents that could topple a life. Where is the $4 million, Julian? Claire asked calmly. Truly, he swallowed. Invested. It's in a position that's about to innovate Americas? Claire asked, arching a brow. We traced it, shells within shells, and then outflows to unregulated crypto platforms. Julian deflated. The bravado leaked away like air from a punctured tire. I thought I could triple it quickly and give Dad the ranch back with profit, he whispered. How much is left? I asked. He stared at the white tablecloth. About 300,000. The number sat between us like a stone dropped in deep water. Claire folded her hands. Julian, you've committed serious crimes. Some consequences are already in motion regardless of what Eric decides. But this is your moment to be honest and to cooperate. It will matter. Julian looked at me then, and for the first time all evening I saw the frightened boy inside the reckless man. Dad, I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I wanted to be the son you were proud of. You could have been, I said quietly. All you had to do was tell the truth and work. Owen drew in a breath. There may still be a way to make amends, if you own every piece of what you did and accept strict terms. Claire nodded. First, immediate return of the remaining funds. Full cooperation with authorities, no independent financial activity, and work, real work, under Eric's supervision. Julian wiped his eyes with a trembling hand. I'll do it, he said. Whatever it takes. Good, Claire said, sliding a notepad forward. Then let's begin. Julian's voice shook as he repeated, I'll do it. I'll do whatever it takes. His eyes darted between me, Claire, and Owen, as though searching for a lifeline. Claire leaned forward, her tone crisp and unwavering. Julian, words won't be enough this time. Everything will be put into writing, signed, and enforced by the court if necessary. You are facing multiple charges. Document fraud, forgery, financial abuse of a senior. The authorities will not overlook this, but your cooperation and restitution can influence the severity of the outcome. Julian swallowed hard, his hands trembling over the table. Tell me what I need to do. I studied him in silence. For a long moment, I didn't see the adult man in front of me, but the boy who used to chase calves across the pasture. His laughter echoing in the fields. My chest tightened with grief for the son I had lost long before tonight. You'll start, I said slowly, by returning every cent of the 300,000 that's left. Tomorrow morning. Julian nodded quickly. Yes, I'll transfer it immediately. Claire scribbled notes. Next, you will liquidate all remaining assets, your house, your car, anything of value. The proceeds will go into a restitution account I will manage on Eric's behalf. Julian's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Fine, I'll sell it all. And until you've proven yourself, Claire continued, you will be prohibited from making any independent financial decisions. No new investments, no loans, no accounts. Every move will require approval. Julian's shoulders sagged. I understand. I leaned forward, my voice carrying a weight that made him look up. But more than money, Julian, you will work. On my ranch, with your own hands. You will learn what it means to build something from sweat and calluses, not schemes and lies. You'll work under me, not as my heir, not as a partner, but as an employee. No salary until you've paid back a significant portion of what you lost. Julian flinched as though struck, pride warring with desperation. Then he nodded. I'll do it, Dad. I'll work. Owen exhaled softly, relief flickering across his face. Good, that's the only way forward. The waiter approached timidly, asking if we needed anything else. I shook my head. Just the check, please. The man practically fled, glad to escape the tension thick enough to choke on. Julian stared at me with wet eyes. Dad, are you going to press charges? Claire answered before I could. The banks have already reported your transactions. Criminal investigations are underway. Eric can't stop that process, but he can influence the civil penalties and whether to cooperate fully with prosecutors. How severe this gets depends on your actions moving forward. Julian's face turned ashen. So I could go to prison. That depends on whether you fight or cooperate, Claire said evenly. But prison is a very real possibility. Julian turned to me then, desperation spilling out. Dad, please, I never meant to hurt you. I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to show I could do more than shovel hay or fix fences. I wanted you to see me as more than a disappointment. His voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment I almost believed the sincerity. Almost. But then I remembered the forged signature, the lies, the arrogance, the way he'd looked me in the eye and told me I was senile. You wanted to prove yourself by stealing from me, I said flatly, by erasing me from my own land. That is not ambition, Julian. That is betrayal. He crumpled in his chair, covering his face with his hands. His sobs shook his shoulders, drawing stares from nearby tables. I felt Owen's steady gaze on me, waiting for my judgment. Finally I spoke. I won't shield you from the law, Julian. You made your choices, and you'll face the consequences. But if you want any chance to rebuild, you'll start tomorrow. 5 a.m, at the ranch. There's a cabin where the seasonal workers stay. That's where you'll live. No privileges, no exceptions. You will earn every inch of trust you destroyed. Julian lowered his hands, his eyes red and swollen. I'll be there, he whispered. Claire slid the notepad toward me. I'll draft the contract tonight. Tomorrow we'll formalize it. Eric, are you comfortable proceeding with this arrangement? I nodded slowly. Yes. But understand, Julian, this is not forgiveness. This is probation. You will work every day to prove you deserve even a fraction of my trust again. Fail once and I'll let the law have you completely. Julian nodded, his face pale but determined. I won't fail you this time, Dad. I sat back, exhausted. The plates before us were cold, the wine untouched. The night had drained me, but a strange calm settled in my chest. Justice was in motion, and for the first time in days, I felt control return to my hands. As we stood to leave, Owen slipped an arm around my shoulders. You were incredible tonight, Dad. I managed a faint smile. No, son. I was just doing what I should have done years ago, setting boundaries. Julian trailed behind us like a shadow, stripped of his arrogance, weighed down by the reality of the road ahead. When we stepped out into the cool night air, I looked up at the stars above the city, then toward the dark horizon where my ranch lay waiting. My land was still mine. My fight wasn't over. And tomorrow, the real work would begin. The next morning, before the sun had even begun to rise, I was already awake. Old habits die hard. For 4 decades, my body had trained itself to rise at 4:30 sharp. I dressed in my worn work jeans, pulled on my boots, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool, the kind of crisp morning air that always smelled of damp earth and hay. And then I heard them, footsteps crunching across the gravel. Julian. He arrived with slumped shoulders, carrying a single duffel bag. His expensive suit from the night before was gone. He wore jeans too clean to belong on a ranch, a plain t-shirt, and sneakers that would be destroyed before the week was over. His eyes were ringed with sleeplessness, his face pale but resolved. "Morning, Dad," he said softly. I nodded, my voice flat. "Good morning, you're late." He glanced at his watch. It was 5:02. "Only by a couple of minutes." "On a ranch," I interrupted. "A couple of minutes is the difference between catching the herd and losing them. From now on, you show up before 5. Not at 5, not after, before." Julian lowered his eyes. "Yes, sir." "Good. Leave your bag in the workers' cabin. That's where you'll stay from now on. No exceptions." He nodded and trudged toward the small cabin, a modest one-room building with a creaky bed frame, a battered dresser, and no luxuries. A far cry from his suburban house with granite countertops and two-car garage. I watched him drop his bag inside, his posture sagging, then return to me. "What's first?" he asked, almost whispering. I handed him a pair of leather work gloves. "First we muck the stables." His face fell. He looked at the gloves like they were shackles. "The stables? You wanted to work," I said, meeting his eyes. "Then work. These animals don't wait for your pride." And so, Julian spent his first morning knee-deep in manure, shoveling out the stalls that housed our cattle. The smell hit him like a fist, and more than once he gagged. But I said nothing. He stumbled, dropped the shovel, cursed under his breath. But each time I simply crossed my arms and stared until he picked it up again. By 8 o'clock, his shirt was soaked through with sweat, his sneakers ruined, and his face red with exertion. His hands, once soft from years of signing checks and typing on keyboards, were already showing the first signs of blisters. At breakfast, we sat on the porch with coffee and scrambled eggs. Owen joined us, pulling up a chair with quiet support. He watched Julian shovel food into his mouth like a starving man. "How does it feel?" Owen asked. Julian swallowed hard. "Like I'm being punished." I set my cup down with a sharp clink. "This isn't punishment, Julian. This is life. This is what it takes to build something real." He didn't answer. The first week was brutal for him. Every dawn he rose, sometimes barely dragging himself from the cabin, and joined me in the fields. He shoveled, lifted, planted, repaired fences, carried feed sacks until his back screamed. At night, he collapsed onto the creaky bed, his body too exhausted even to curse. But he never quit, and he never complained out loud. By the second week, his hands were blistered and raw. By the third, they had begun to harden. His shoulders thickened. His skin darkened under the sun. For the first time in years, I saw sweat on his brow earned by honest labor. Claire visited regularly to monitor his compliance. She checked the restitution account, confirmed the sale of his car and house, and documented every step. "So far, he's doing everything required," she told me one afternoon as we sat at the kitchen table. "The court will see this as good faith." I nodded, though my heart was cautious. Good faith has to last longer than a few weeks. That night, Julian joined me on the porch. His face was weary, but there was something different in his eyes. "Dad," he said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Ask." "Will you ever forgive me?" The question sat between us heavier than any feed sack. I took my time answering. "Forgiveness isn't given, Julian. It's earned. Day by day, one action at a time. You're proving you can work. But trust, that will take years to rebuild." He nodded, staring at his blistered hands. "I understand." 3 months passed this way. Slowly, the ranch began to change him. He no longer moved like a man desperate to escape, but like someone learning rhythm, pace, discipline. He started noticing things he hadn't before. The way a pecan tree's leaves yellow when the soil is overwatered, the signs of sickness in cattle, the importance of fixing a fence before it costs you a herd. One morning, while pruning the orchard, he said, "This tree looks sick." He knelt, examined the soil, then added, "Could be too much water, or maybe a pest." I studied him for a long moment. His answer was careful, observant, not the lazy guesses of a man playing farmer. "Good," I said at last. His face lit up as though I'd handed him treasure. On weekends, Owen often visited. The brothers' relationship, once poisoned by Julian's arrogance, began to thaw. Owen still looked at him with a wary eye, but he also saw the sweat, the dirt, the sincerity building in each day's work. One evening over dinner, Owen asked, "So, Julian, how's it feel to be the one fixing fences instead of breaking them?" Julian laughed, a short, genuine laugh I hadn't heard in years. Feels like hell, but a good kind of hell. We all chuckled, and for a brief moment the air felt lighter, almost like family again. But I didn't let myself soften too much. I knew change was fragile. I knew one slip, one lie, one scheme could undo it all. That night, alone on the porch, I thought of Emily, my late wife. I remembered her voice urging patience, urging compassion. "Give them space to grow, Eric," she would have said, even the stubborn ones. Them all. I looked toward the cabin where Julian's light still glowed faintly. Maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to grow. 6 months into Julian's probation, the ranch had reshaped him in ways neither of us could have predicted. His once pale skin was bronzed from the sun, his muscles hardened from lifting bales and repairing fences, his hands calloused and scarred in ways that no manicure or office job could hide. But more than his body, it was his spirit that seemed to be changing. He woke up before dawn without my prompting. He no longer dragged his feet toward the barn, but walked with purpose. He learned to move with the rhythm of the animals instead of against it. He had stopped checking his phone every few minutes. The device now lay forgotten on the cabin dresser. Slowly, the arrogance that once coated his every word had given way to something closer to humility. But I didn't forget. I couldn't. Every night, as I sat on the porch staring at the horizon, I thought of Emily. I could almost hear her voice in the quiet. "Eric, don't harden your heart so much you can't see the change when it's real." She had always been the soft edge to my iron will. And yet, I had also heard her say countless times, "Boundaries protect love, Eric. Without them, love becomes slavery." One Saturday afternoon, Owen came by. He leaned against the corral fence watching Julian work with the cattle. "I'll admit," Owen said, his voice thoughtful, "I didn't think he'd last a week, but look at him." Julian was guiding a stubborn calf back toward the pen, his movements patient, his voice steady. He no longer barked orders or cursed under his breath when things didn't go his way. He coaxed, waited, adjusted, like a man learning to respect the will of another living creature. "He's learning," I said. Owen glanced at me. "Do you think you'll ever forgive him?" The question lodged in my chest. I took a long breath. "Forgiveness isn't a finish line, son. It's a path. He's walking it, but I don't know how far he'll get." Owen nodded. "At least he's walking." That evening, after Owen left, Julian came up to the porch, his shirt clinging to his back with sweat. He stood awkwardly, almost like a boy again, unsure if he was welcome. "Dad," he began, "Claire told me I'll need to testify against the people who scammed me. The prosecutors want details." I raised an eyebrow. "And you're willing?" Julian nodded firmly. "Yes, I lost your money to them. The least I can do is help make sure they don't hurt anyone else. Maybe I can even help get some of it back." For the first time, I believed he meant it. The next week, Claire drove us to the city for Julian's meeting with the prosecutors. I sat in the corner of the conference room as Julian laid out everything: the fake investment pitches, the promises of guaranteed returns, the platforms with cartoon logos that had disappeared overnight. When the prosecutors asked how he had funded the investments, Julian's voice faltered. I stole it. From my father, forged his signature, lied to him, betrayed him." The room was silent. Even the prosecutors looked up from their notes. The shame in Julian's voice was so raw, so unvarnished, that for a moment I felt my throat tighten. Claire placed a hand on his arm. "This honesty will matter, Julian. Keep it up." On the drive home, Julian turned to me. "Dad, I don't expect you to forgive me for what I did, but I want you to know I'm not running anymore. Not from the law, not from work, not from you. I'll face whatever comes." I stared out the window at the rolling fields, unwilling to let him see the storm of emotions inside me. Pride, sorrow, anger, hope. 3 months later, 9 months into his year of probation, the change was undeniable. Julian no longer looked like a man serving penance. He looked like a rancher. He joked with the other workers. He stayed late to fix irrigation lines. On Sundays, instead of sleeping in, he sat under a pecan tree reading books on soil science and cattle management. One evening after supper, I found him sitting outside the cabin, a worn notebook on his lap. "What are you writing?" I asked. He looked up, embarrassed. "A business plan. Not for me, for the ranch. I've been thinking of ways to increase yields without overworking the soil. I know I don't have the right to suggest anything, but I wanted to show you I'm learning. He handed me the notebook. His handwriting was messy, but the ideas were thoughtful. Rotational grazing, cover crops, modern irrigation systems. I skimmed through in silence, my chest heavy with conflicting emotions. "You've been paying attention," I finally said. Julian smiled faintly, for once. I handed the notebook back. "Keep writing. We'll see what comes of it." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I thought of Emily again, of how proud she would have been to see our son sweating under the same sun that had aged my hands. Maybe, just maybe, this was what redemption looked like. Not in words, but in blistered hands and honest labor. Still, I knew the real test was coming. In 3 months, the year would be up, and then I would have to decide, not just about the ranch, but about family, trust, forgiveness. For now, I held on to the only truth I trusted. Tomorrow at dawn, Julian would rise, put on his work gloves, and prove himself all over again. A year had nearly passed since that night at the Summit Grill when everything shattered and began again. The morning of Julian's final probation day arrived, and I felt the weight of it pressing on my chest like a yoke. At 4:30 a.m., I woke to the sound of boots crunching gravel outside. I didn't even need to look. I knew it was Julian. For 12 months straight, not once had he missed that sound. Rain, cold, blistering heat, every day he rose before dawn, ready to work. When I stepped out onto the porch, he was already saddling the mule for the morning rounds. His back was broader now, his shoulders squared, his face browned by the sun. His hands, once soft, were thick with calluses. "Morning, Dad," he said. "Morning, Julian." We set out together, walking the familiar trail through the pecan orchards. The sun was just beginning to edge the horizon with gold. "I can't believe it's been a year," Julian said, his voice quiet. "Feels like a lifetime, or maybe just the start of one." I didn't answer. I wanted to hear his heart before offering mine. We reached the north pasture and checked the irrigation lines. Julian bent down to adjust a valve, his movements efficient, careful, practiced. He looked up at me. "I used to think this kind of work was beneath me. Now I see it's what saved me." His words struck deep. By noon, Claire arrived at the ranch. She carried a leather folder, her face professional but softer than usual. "Eric, Julian, it's time to review the year." We sat at the old kitchen table, the same table where Emily used to serve Sunday roasts. Claire spread out the documents. "Julian has complied with every condition. He returned the remaining $300,000, sold his assets, and contributed another $250,000 through restitution. He worked without salary for 12 months. He cooperated fully with authorities and testified against the crypto scammers. Thanks to his testimony, several arrests were made. The court views this very favorably." Julian kept his eyes down, his hands clasped tightly. Claire turned to me. "Eric, the decision now rests with you. Do you want to proceed with full civil action, or do you wish to recognize Julian's compliance and allow him to continue under supervised partnership?" The room was still. Even the old clock on the wall seemed to pause. I looked at my son, not at the man who forged my name, but at the man who had risen every day to labor beside me, who had bent his pride under the sun and allowed sweat to wash away his arrogance. "Julian," I said, my voice steady, "a year ago you stole from me. You tried to erase me from my own land. You shattered my trust." He nodded, his throat working. "I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But this past year," I continued, "you've shown me something I never thought I'd see again. Humility, endurance, respect. You've proven you can build instead of destroy." His eyes lifted, brimming with tears. "I can't erase what you did," I said, "but I can acknowledge what you've become. You will not be my heir, not yet. That title has to be earned over time, not demanded. But today I offer you a chance to be my junior partner. With conditions. 3 more years of supervision. Every major decision cleared through me. Every account monitored. And if you ever betray me again, you'll lose everything, including me." Julian's lips trembled. "Dad, do you mean it?" "I mean it." He pressed his hands over his face, his shoulders shaking. For the first time in years, his tears didn't look like manipulation. They looked like gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. "I won't waste this." Claire slid the new contract across the table. Sign here, Julian. This makes it official. He signed without hesitation. That evening, Owen came by. When I told him the news, his eyes lit with cautious relief. He walked over to Julian and hugged him, something I hadn't seen in years. "Don't screw this up," Owen said, half stern, half hopeful. "I won't," Julian replied, his voice breaking. "Not this time." Later that night, after the ranch grew quiet, I sat alone on the porch. The moonlight bathed the fields Emily and I had poured our lives into. For the first time in a long while, I felt her presence beside me, not in sorrow but in pride. Julian had lost $4 million, but through this year of sweat and sacrifice, he had regained something priceless, the chance to be a son again. And I had regained hope. The ranch had weathered betrayal, loss, and near ruin. But it had also become the ground of redemption. Sometimes the hardest soil grows the strongest roots, and as I listened to Julian's footsteps crossing the yard to the cabin, I allowed myself, for the first time in a year, to smile. 5 years later, the ranch stood taller than it ever had, not just in profit, but in spirit. The pecan orchards stretched greener and fuller, the cattle were healthier, the fences stronger. The land bore the weight of storms and droughts, but it thrived, just as we had. Julian was no longer the man who once slid forged papers across a table. He rose before dawn without fail, his boots worn, his hands strong and scarred. He knew the land now, not as numbers in a ledger, but as living soil and breath. He had earned the respect of the ranch hands, who once whispered behind his back but now worked beside him like brothers. One cool autumn morning, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching Julian drive a herd into the lower pasture. Owen was there too, helping his brother. They moved with easy coordination, unspoken signals guiding the cattle into place. I felt Emily's absence sharply at moments like this, wishing she could see the men our boys had become. But I also felt her presence, soft as the morning light, woven into every tree, every fence post, every laugh echoing across the field. Julian came up to the porch, sweat on his brow, a grin tugging his lips. "We got them settled, Dad. No strays this time." I nodded. "Good work, both of you." Owen clapped Julian on the back. "He's turned into a real rancher, hasn't he?" Julian flushed, but his smile stayed. "Still learning." "Still earning," I corrected. "And you've done well." That afternoon, Claire visited. Though her role had shifted from lawyer to trusted family friend, she still kept an eye on the legal side of things. She sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the accounts. "Eric, Julian," she said with a smile, "I've rarely seen a turnaround like this. The restitution plan is complete. Every cent accounted for." Julian's eyes widened. "You mean—" Claire nodded. "Yes, you're free of the agreement. Legally, financially, everything. You've honored every term." For a moment, silence. Then Julian turned to me, his voice breaking. "Dad, I don't know how to thank you for giving me that chance." I studied him. The boy who once betrayed me was gone. Before me stood a man who had rebuilt himself, brick by brick, with sweat and humility. "You don't thank me," I said. "You thank yourself. You did the work. You chose the path." Tears glimmered in his eyes, but he didn't hide them. "I'll never betray your trust again. Not for all the money in the world." Owen put an arm around his brother, and for the first time in decades, I saw unity instead of division between my sons. That night, we shared supper around the old kitchen table, just like in Emily's days. The laughter was easy, the food warm, the silence comfortable. I looked at my sons and felt something I hadn't dared hope for years ago: peace. As the stars blanketed the ranch in quiet light, Julian joined me on the porch. He leaned against the railing, gazing out at the land. "Dad," he said softly, "someday, when you're ready, I'd like to carry this forward. Not as your heir, not as your replacement, but as your partner, as your son." I let the words settle, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "You already are, Julian. You already are." The cicadas hummed in the fields, the cattle lowed in the distance, and the ranch, the land that had once nearly torn us apart, now held us together. Sometimes betrayal carves wounds so deep you think they'll never heal. But with truth, sweat, and time, even the deepest scars can turn into strength. I had lost $4 million. I had nearly lost a son. But what I gained was worth far more. Redemption, reconciliation, and the promise of a legacy built not just on land, but on forgiveness and hard-earned trust. And as I sat there under the stars, I whispered a quiet prayer of thanks to Emily. We did it, love. Our boy came home. 3 more years passed after Julian's restitution ended, and though the ranch flourished, the question of forgiveness lingered like a shadow. Julian had proven himself in every way a man could. He worked longer hours than anyone, never once complained, and brought fresh ideas that made the ranch stronger. His plans for rotational grazing had boosted our yields, his irrigation upgrades saved us during a dry spell, and his commitment never faltered. But forgiveness, true forgiveness, remained elusive. One summer evening, we sat on the porch after supper, cicadas buzzing in the trees. Julian leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his face weathered and lined from years under the sun. "Dad," he said, his voice low, "I know I've earned back your respect. I know I've proved I can be a good man. But I need to ask you something. Do you forgive me? Truly forgive me?" I stared out over the fields, the pecan trees swaying gently in the breeze. My throat tightened. I wanted to say yes, to give him the gift of absolution. But the truth pressed heavy on my chest. "I respect the man you've become," I said slowly. "I trust you with the ranch, with the land. But forgiveness," I shook my head. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to give you that, Julian." His face crumpled, though he tried to hide it. He nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand." "I don't say this to punish you," I continued. "I say it because betrayal cuts deep. You didn't just forge my signature or steal money. You told me I was senile. You tried to erase me from my own life. That doesn't vanish, not even after years of good work. It leaves scars." Tears brimmed in his eyes. "I know, and I'll carry that until the day I die." We sat in silence for a long while, the weight of truth hanging heavy between us. Then I added, "But Julian, scars don't mean death. They mean survival. Our relationship may never return to what it was, but we've built something new. It may not be forgiveness, but it's respect, and respect is more than we had before." Julian wiped his face, his voice thick. "I'll take that, Dad. I'll take respect, and I'll keep earning it every day." And he did. Years later, when people spoke of the Wynn Ranch, they didn't just talk about its size or success. They talked about the men who ran it, the father who never surrendered, and the son who clawed his way back from betrayal. Our story wasn't one of perfect reconciliation. It was one of boundaries, respect, and hard truth. Forgiveness never came, but trust, rebuilt brick by brick, proved strong enough to carry us forward. And maybe in the end, that was enough.